Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of New Review. I'm Tyler King, and today I wanted to finally close the book on the Peter Murphy retrospective review series that I had done, and I wanted to do a ranking of all of the Peter Murphy studio albums. Before I do that, I do want to set up a couple of rules. This is only for the albums released under the name Peter Murphy, so no Bauhaus, no Dolly's Car. It is also only going to be his studio albums, so no live albums, nothing like Alive Just for Love or the Wild Birds live album. Also, no compilations, no EPs, no, you know, non-album singles like Tale of the Tongue or anything like that. This is just going to focus on the 9 primary studio albums released by Peter Murphy. Um, the other thing I want to say before I start this is that, except for the album that's at my bottom list, but at the bottom of my list, I would venture to say Peter Murphy has yet to release a quote-unquote bad album. And for as much as I love Gary Newman, and, I started out this channel by doing a series of Gary Newman album reviews. Um, but I will say, unlike Gary Newman, Peter Murphy has consistently released good, if not great, album after good, if not great, album. Whereas Gary Newman, there is a period of his career there for about 10 years where things get very dicey. But it was much more difficult for me to create this list because of the consistency of Peter Murphy's output. Another thing is that one of the reasons why I initially put off finishing up the album review series was seeing him performing some of these albums live at the residency he did at the Chapel in San Francisco. And seeing some of these albums performed live did help to strengthen my appreciation of them. Now, granted, of course, that was about 2.5-ish years ago, so, I'm not going to get into other reasons about why it took me so long to finish this up, but initially I did want to see how well some of these songs translated live. Like, for instance, up until those residency dates, despite having seen Peter maybe 8 or 9 times, I'd yet to see a single song from his first album, or a single song from Holy Smoke, or a single song from Deep, besides the singles, Cuts You Up, Strange Kind of Love, Deep Ocean Vast Sea, and Marlene Dietrich's favorite poem. I hadn't seen the bulk of that album performed. Same with Cascade. So that was another reason for why I waited so long to do those videos and this video as well. So hopefully you accept my apology for it taking so long. But without further ado, I do want to get into ranking all 9 of Peter Murphy's solo studio albums, starting with number 9. It is one of only 2 albums of his I do not own in any format. I think this one was only released on CD, and that is Unshattered. Unshattered is easily the worst Peter Murphy album, to the point where, after having done the last review video that I did for it, and listening to it the last time for that, I have yet to listen to it again. I do not know if I will ever listen to it again. I think that it is boring, it is overproduced, it is meandering, it is lazy. I think that it features some of the worst lyrics he's ever written, some of the most lazy compositions. Um, I can't even remember what I said I liked off of it besides Blinded Like Saul and Breaking No One's Heaven. Besides those 2 songs, I could not tell you what the rest of the album sounds like outside of 20 or 30-second snippets of certain songs that I have saved in my memory. It is the tarnished tarnishment, the ink blot on what is otherwise a pretty spotless career in terms of releases, and I think that there's a reason why it was the only album that was never planned to be played live at either the San Francisco and New York residencies that Peter Murphy had done in 2019. So, again, if that's your favorite album of his, I'm sorry. Number 8 is so let me preface it by saying from here on out the albums are good. Um, not yet great, but overall solid albums. So I think that at least between this one and the next one, I did have a little bit, excuse me, a little bit of a difficulty in terms of choosing them, but I had to go ahead and give number 8 to his most recent studio album, Lion. As I said in my review for the video, it is a very straightforward album. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of risks, which I'm not saying every album has to take risk. I'm not saying every album has to be an innovation, but there is just not a lot to it that makes me want to come back to it. But when I do come back to it, I do enjoy it. It isn't like Unshattered where I go back to it and immediately just put on something else. Seeing some of the songs performed live also definitely helped. I think that Still, Hang Up, Lion, Locktain, those are all solid songs. I also, and I didn't mention this in the review video for it, but I do think that the song The Rose did work better in an acoustic setting than the actual, like, quote-unquote electric version of it that is on this album. I think that Lion is a solid enough follow-up to Ninth. I just wish that there was more to it that made me come back to it, especially since it's been so long since he released an album. I really would hate for this to be the last album that he releases. Number 7, and this is the only Peter Murphy album that I own, specifically on CD, is, you can't really see it too well, Dust. Dust is a very solid album, but much like Lion, I do have to be in a specific mood to listen to it because it is a very somber piece of music. It is also his longest album, despite only having 9 songs on here. Even says on the back the total is 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 13 seconds. So it is an album that you really do have to take time to listen to it, not just because of the length of it, but also because of how intricate most of these songs are. Uh, I mean, and I can't single one out because all of them, the instrumentation is just like on a whole other level. Um, Fake Sparkle or Golden Dust, Your Face, Things to Remember, No Home Without Its Sire. I mean, like, those songs just on their own are phenomenal. And that's probably going to be a word I keep using while I talk about some of these songs. Um, I do think that it does falter at the end with the 2 re-recordings of My Last 2 Weeks and the epilogue version of Subway. Even without those 2 songs, it still would have been about 52 minutes long, which is still album length. I mean, ridiculously album length. 52 minutes for only 7 songs is absurd. Um, but yeah, like I said, especially with, um, like I said in regards to Lion, I do have to be in a specific mood for it, but it does definitely have a very strong place in my heart for this album. So yeah, that is number 7 with Dust. Number 6, and this I think is going to be where the controversies start popping up, so I apologize in advance for what I'm about to say is my number 6 spot, but my number 6 spot is going to be Cascade. Um, Cascade, I think, was up until the point it came out his most produced sounding album. Of course, Unshattered would take that title like that. Um, I think that Cascade does have some very, very beautiful, strong songs on it. Wild Birds Flock to Me, um, Mirror to My Woman's Mind, Disappearing, uh, The Scarlet Thing in You. I think that it's solid song after solid song. And I should also say that from here on out, starting with Cascade going forward, these are all albums I would consider great in that there are no bad songs on them. Well, for the most part, we'll get to that when we get to it. And just completely solid listens from front to back that I can at least continually come back to. It was really hard decision for me putting this one at number 6 because pretty much any from here up to I'd say number 2 could possibly be interchanged at any given day. But for now, this is my number 6. Um, it's definitely a beloved album. I do think that after this album, there was a very distinct turning point in his career, and he started taking more risks musically. I mean, especially with Dust. Whether or not some of those risks paid off, that's really up to you. But I think that Cascade was the culmination of the sound that he had been moving towards since his first album. And it does it beautifully. It is a great sounding album. The songwriting is phenomenal. I think that the playing on it is great. And despite it being at my number 6, I think that if you wanted to get somebody into Peter Murphy and Peter Murphy's solo music, this would probably be, to me, one of the best places to start. And, despite saying that, it's still my number 6 with Cascade. Number 5, I feel like this will be less of a controversial opinion, and that is going to be Holy Smoke. Holy Smoke was an album that I initially was not very warm towards. Uh, and still to this day, I do think that it has a bit of a cold feeling to it, whether that is because of the production of it. I can't really put my finger on it. But I think that, not the best picture in the world, but the color scheme of it, that kind of gray and brown, I get the feeling of that color when I listen to this album. It is a very quote unquote dry sounding album. I don't think that it's very overproduced outside of maybe something like Hit Song. Um, I think that the opener, Keep Me From Harm, is great. I Will Die on the Hill of Defending, Kill the Hate. I think it's kind of a goofy song, but I really love it, and I was bummed that he didn't play it when I saw him doing Holy Smoke, but whatever. Um, Low Room is so good. The Sweetest Drop, You're So I mean, pretty much everything on here, I think, except for maybe like Our Secret Garden and Dream Gone By. Everything on here I think is great. His voice is in top form on here. I do like the little flourishments of Middle Eastern instrumentation, like towards the ending of Keep Me From Harm. It's just overall, it's such a solid album, and it is one that I do continually come back to, which I did not think I would ever say from a few years ago. And so that is number 5 with Holy Smoke. Number 4, and again, this is going to be another really controversial opinion. Um, please don't hate me and immediately thumbs down this video. Number 4 is going to be Deep. Again, like I said with Holy Smoke, phenomenal album pretty much from start to back. Uh, the songs that kind of detract that, top 3 status for me are The Line Between the Devil's Teeth and That Which Cannot Be Repeat and Shy. Um, I really think pretty much everything else is top tier Peter Murphy, and I would say with also the inclusion of this album, like I said with Cascade, if you want to introduce somebody to the music of Peter Murphy, I would say if not Cascade, Deep is the best album, I think, to start with. It really encapsulates that romantic feeling that I think he's always kind of chased in his music. Particularly songs like Seven Veils, like A Strange Kind of Love, like Marlene Dietrich's favorite poem. I just think that it is an album that I continually come back to, and I would say from Deep up through number 1, these are all albums I would gladly say are some of the best that I've ever heard. It's just that unfortunately I like the top 3 a little more than Deep. I would say that at least with this one and the next 2, it was very neck and neck. Um, but yeah, overall, I think it's a great album, and it has some of my favorite songs of his. So number 4 is going to be Deep. Number 3, so top 3 Peter Murphy albums. This is another one, just like Unshattered, that I do not own in any format. I wish I owned the vinyl version of it, but it goes for about $150, $200, so I'm not getting that anytime soon. But number 3 is Ninth. Now, I will be the first person to admit I am a little bit biased towards this. Ninth is the album that he had just come out with when I started seeing him live, so the first 4 or 5 shows of his that I ever saw were very centered around that album. So I saw most of the songs played continually every time that I saw him. But I would say that if you are introducing somebody to Peter Murphy's solo output and they only know him from Bauhaus, Ninth would be my place to start with, because it does feel a bit more like a post-punk album than anything he ever did. And I made this comment, I remember when I reviewed his older albums, it always seemed like on one album, up through and including Cascade, there was at least one song that sounded like it could have been a Bauhaus song. And to me, Ninth almost sounds like it could have been a Bauhaus record, especially on songs like Uneven and Brittle and Velocity Bird. And something like I Spit Roses, I hear that almost as a descendant of She's in Parties. I think that, if you don't like Ninth, I completely understand why you don't like Ninth. It is a very abrasive album. It is a very loud and in-your-face album. But for me, I will always have a sentimental attachment to it, considering that it is the album that got me into Peter Murphy. And so for that, I thank it, and it sits uh, very comfortably at the number 3 spot. Alright, top 2. So, it's a little bit fitting, I suppose, that the top 2 albums should also be the first 2 albums, which is not something that I was actually very aware of until just this moment. Both Love Hysteria and Should the World Fail to Fall Apart have their share of great songs and not great songs. However, I had to go with, for number 2, the one that I just don't come back to as often and I don't get as much enjoyment out of. And that is Love Hysteria.
Is Love Hysteria a great album? Yes, that cannot be denied. This has some of my favorite Peter Murphy songs on it. All Night Long, His Circle and Hers Meet, Time Has Got Nothing to Do with It, Blind Sublime, My Last 2 Weeks. Those are all great. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, across the board, perfect songs. What holds this one back for me are Dragnet Drag, Indigo Eyes, and his horrible cover of Fun Time. Dragnet Drag drags on way too long. It sounds very dated. Fun Time, I think, is just one of the worst things he's put on any of his albums. And Indigo Eyes, I know a lot of people really like it, but for me, it's just kind of whatever song. Um, that being said, all the ones that I had mentioned as being 10 out of 10, I can listen to any of those over and over and over and over again. Particularly as of late, I think I've realized my favorite song on the album is Blind Sublime. It's just such a driving, forwardly moving song. I can't get enough of it. I think it's great, and I think that Love Hysteria is great, and there's a reason why it's my number 2. However, at the end of the day, what that means is that my number 1 favorite Peter Murphy album of all time, at least as of right now, is the debut, Should the World Fail to Fall Apart. I will also be the first person to admit that this is probably not most people's number 1, may not even be in a lot of people's top 5. This is an album that, up until his residency, I had never seen him do a single song off of. I think that besides Final Solution, he hadn't really played anything from this album since 1993 or 92. And, like Final Solution isn't even a Peter Murphy original. But, oh well. I just think that every single song on here, except for Jamal, the closing song, is just one I could listen to again and again and again, over and over and over and over again. I think that it's the most quote-unquote fun sounding album I think Peter Murphy has ever made, because it sounds like him just kind of letting loose and just doing whatever it is that he wants to do. So because of that, you do get songs like the title track, which almost has like a rap in it. You get stuff like The Answer Is Clear, which is a very clear dig at Daniel Ash. You get the romance of Canvas Beauty. You get the quote-unquote rock of the covers The Light Pours Out of Me and Final Solution. I just think that it encapsulates so many different facets of what makes Peter Murphy Peter Murphy. And really, it's the one album I can always go back to and always enjoy every single moment of it. Is it a perfect album? I don't think so. I really don't think that Peter Murphy has yet to release what, in my eyes, is a perfect album. There's always one or two songs that are just like, yeah, you're so close. Like, yeah, you were right there. And for me on this album, it's Jamal. I'm sure that most people would agree that it is not the best song on Should the World Fail to Fall Apart, but there is a charm to this album that continually makes me want to come back to it. And every time I do, I'm very happy that I did. And I don't think that at the time that I was making the previous videos, like when I made the review video for that, I do not think I would have placed it at my number 1 at that time. At that time, it probably would have been 9th, or it would have been deep. But listening to it more, seeing him perform it live, it really enhanced my view of the album in my eyes. and I think that it's one that I'm always going to continue to come back to. And like I said, you may not agree with this particular ranking. I will be the first one to admit that some of these albums are in odd spots. But for me, at least, it was difficult placing some of these albums. And like I said, with one exception, I don't think that he has yet to release an album that I would consider bad or just not good. Uh, some of these change day to day. There are some days where I would much rather listen to Cascade than any of the other albums that I rated above it. Um, but just from the point of view of enjoyment, the amount of songs on each album that uh, that I enjoy, um, this is just the ranking that I came up with today. And who's to say that in a year or even a month it will be the same? Uh, and yeah, that's. I mean, he has such a great body of work. Um, 9 albums, which in a career, in a solo career spanning something like 35 years, might not seem like a lot, but I do think that he is a musician who does take his time with his projects and what's I'm looking for, gives them the attention that they deserve. And so yeah, it's been 7 years since the last Peter Murphy album, but I think that that's because he sometimes takes his time. And if because of that we get another album like Dust, then that will be fine with me. um, and yeah, that's really all I have to say about my Peter Murphy rankings. Thank you for watching, and I'm really interested in knowing what you think of my ranking and also what your ranking is, because music is subjective, rankings are subjective, lists are subjective, and I love music, and I love making these kinds of lists. This might be something that I'll do more of going forward in the future. I already have a couple ideas of some, but um, yeah, just thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being interested in what I have to say about Peter Murphy and his output and his studio albums. Um, yeah, I am Tyler King with New Review. This was every Peter Murphy studio album ranked. I will see you next time, and until then, keep listening to great music.